If everyone could take their seats, please, and if you could please close that door there. Thank you. If anyone wants to come in, they can certainly come in. The chair will call to order the Board of Education meeting, Community Unit School District 201, today, Tuesday, September 25th, 2012. And roll call, please, Ms. Caparelli.
Mr. Armstrong?
Here.
Ms. Caparelli is here. Mr. Charleston?
Here.
Ms. Charlton?
Here.
Mrs. Hancock?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas?
You could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is approval of minutes. August 21st, 2012.
Yeah, I'm,
Anything?
well, one thing, I think that on the report or the vote for going into closed session, I believe that there was one nay vote on that day. Right?
Yes,
Am I
yes,
right
there
there?
was.
Yes.
I voted nay.
Okay, so change that to nay.
And Marie, I did send a note to Judy. Is Judy not?
She's out of town.
Okay. I did send a note. I wasn't at the 21st, so somebody can, verify that. But I think the minutes should reflect if Mr. Charleston excused himself before closed, because I know on the 11th there was a vote afterward, and it just says unanimous. So it should be at least noted that it was unanimous of the members remaining.
I was inclined simply to reflect it in closed, that I wasn't present, and then, for the open vote, to reflect that, Mr. Charleston didn't vote.
Okay? That's fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the August 21st, 2012 regular meeting of the Board of Education as amended.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Abstain.
opposed? I'm sorry.
Abstain.
Joel abstain, okay. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the August 21st, 2012 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented,
As amended.
as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Well, I'm sorry, but it's also saying in here that Mr. Charleston was in that closed session, and again, we need to just...
Yeah, I believe the amendment is that it be
Right, I just-
reflected that I'm not
Right,
present.
okay.
Okay.
Mary Kay.
But these
Absolutely.
minutes, right,
Right.
okay. Okay, so as amended, and who?
Aye.
And I seconded.
Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well, I abstain.
Abstain?
Abstain.
Okay, motion carries. September 11th, 2012, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the September 11th, 2012 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. September 11, 2012, closed. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the September 11, 2012 regular meeting of the Board of Education as amended.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Abstain.
Any opposed? Okay, are there any public comments?
I guess we have one. I'm sitting in the back of the room and I'm having a hard time hearing, and I talked to some people through the glass and they said they could barely hear. Are we all mic'd up?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Okay, just checking, because it wasn't this
I
hard to
think
hear
so.
last time,
Yeah.
last meeting. Okay.
If some people want to come in, there's still chairs.
Right, but even, I'm in the room and I
Okay.
had a hard time, so I asked them what they could hear and they said just barely.
Okay.
So-
Okay, well,
Okay,
we'll try to speak up a little more.
No problem. Hey, that
Yeah.
works. Thanks.
okay, thank you. Then no Then we will move on to the public hearing. The public hearing for the proposed 2012-2013 budget. The President of the Board of Education calls the public hearing to order regarding the proposed 2012-2013 budget.
What we're doing something a little bit different this year with our budget hearing. We want to make sure that it's noticed properly and advertised correctly. And so we're starting the hearing this evening. We'll take public comment this evening, but then we will, at the conclusion of it, continue it at our October 23rd board meeting, and then that's when the board would approve the final budget.
Okay. So are there any comments from members of the Board of Education regarding the proposed 2012-2013 budget?
Kim, I didn't send you this earlier, but just going through it again, we keep having a plus in the transportation column, and I think you've explained to us before how that happens, but we have more revenue than we have expense in transportation. Mm-hmm. Is that timing, or is it less cost on transportation? What creates that?
Some of it's in how you allocate the levy, and then again, your contractual obligations from the vendor.
Okay.
Okay, any other board comments? Okay, then, are there any public comments concerning the proposed 2012-2013 budget? Okay. Then the chair declares that the public hearing on the proposed 2012-2013 budget will be continued on October 23rd at 7 p.m. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Are there any questions?
You know what, we're removing the swim club facility use contract. We don't have that this evening, so.
Did you say we're removing number 4?
Removing number 4, yes.
Haven't received it yet.
Yes.
Apparently I can't hear you either, so.
Have they checked with anyone in there to see?
Turned it up a little.
Okay,
They did. turn
Better.
up. Okay.
Thumbs up from outside.
Thank you.
all right, I'll try and speak louder too.
Hey, sorry.
Okay, anything else on the consent agenda? The chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended. Number 1, personnel recommendations. Number 2, approval of student tour. Number 3, approval of designated representative for April 9, 2013 school board election. Number 5, resolution to abate working cash funds. 6, approval of September 2012 expenditure report. And 7, ratification of August 2012 regular payroll. Roll call, please.
So moved?
Second.
Read.
A roll call, please.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli, yes. Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes. Okay, the next item is the presentation of monthly financial statements.
Okay, for the month of August, the state still continues to owe the district $318,000 for fiscal year 2012. That was vouchered but has not been released. We did receive a small installment of the 2011 tax levy in the amount of about $288,000 during the month of August. So total property taxes collected through the end of August are $10.8 million, which is a 52% collection rate, which is comparable to the past 3 years. In the education fund, the state still owes the district about $208,000 from FY12, and the district has been receiving the FY13 general state aid payments. And we should start to see in the next few months other mandated categorical revenue coming in after we do the first quarter expenditure reports. And again, in the transportation fund, the state still owes the district $111,000 for fiscal year 12. And in terms of expenditures, things are running where we anticipate expenditures should be at this time. In terms of investments, we've done a few. We've got the working cash funds invested in some CDs and some term series investments. And then statement of position and other reports are attached for your review. Does anyone have any questions?
PMA investments, that's truly 10 basis points per annum, right?
Yeah, it's 0.1%. Yes, it's virtually, interest rates in the short term are virtually at zero.
Yes.
So it's only when you're going out. You can see from the investment portfolio, we did a CD for a year, and that was a 0.5%.
Yep.
So, and one for just a little over, I think, 9 months at 0.4. The rates are really, interest rates are, virtually at zero.
Are we going to say anything about those other two things? The presentation?
Oh, yeah, I can do, okay. And then the ISB salary compensation report is presented for your review. And this is a new requirement this year, as effective January 2012. And it replaces the salary compensation report, the administrative salary compensation report that we have done in prior years. This has all of the teacher and administrator salaries for fiscal year 12 on there. And it has everyone listed by name, position, base salary, the number of vacation days, sick days, any bonuses, annuities, and other benefits. And the other benefits includes district contributions for TRS, THIS, the medical and dental insurance, life and long-term disability, and then if there would be any other, other types of benefits per contract. So, and the base salary is the base plus any stipends that teachers receive. And so that will be submitted to ISB tomorrow and then posted on the website. And then the other report that we have which is a new requirement this year, is the IMRF salary compensation report. And this is for IMRF employees whose total compensation package exceeds $75,000 per year. And that's the anticipated for 2013. And so that report is attached, and that will also be posted on the website.
So the ISB stuff is looking backwards as a recap, and the IMRF is looking
going forward
as like a budget.
Yes.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is board member conduct. Did you?
Yeah. I'm not sure how to.
Go ahead.
Okay. I move we as a board do not hold this discussion at this time, but wait until the next board self-evaluation.
Okay, so you're asking to not have this discussion tonight and to wait till another board self-evaluation?
Yes.
Well, we don't have one scheduled.
We could schedule one
Okay, so you're asking to schedule one?
in lieu of this discussion here this way.
This discussion, okay. So there's a motion.
If I could just interject here for a moment. It was me that asked for this to be put on the agenda, and Diana, all due respect, I do agree that trying to work things through with the self-evaluation process is probably a pretty good idea, but I reached out to Barb Toney, our IASB rep, on this topic, and she said although she'd be willing to work with us, she's not sure that whatever she could do would be very effective at this point. So I'm not really sure if going in that direction is the best way, or if we should just, have this discussion today. So just wanted to add that.
Okay, so there's a motion on the table. Does anybody have any other comments? Okay, so the motion is to take this off the agenda for tonight's meeting. Mary Kay, do you want to ask?
Ask what?
Let's do a roll call.
Want me to do a roll call?
Well, there's no
I think
second?
you have to have a
Oh, I'm
first and
sorry,
a second.
motion.
Who seconded it?
No one as yet.
No, not yet, not yet.
Do we have a
Okay,
second?
we have a motion.
I'll serve
So
the
there's a
second.
motion, so he's
Happily.
second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is that 2? Okay. All opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, and then that's 4 no. So the motion does not carry. I'm going to just say a couple things here. After our last board meeting, Kevin and I received an email from Gary Armstrong requesting that we add this particular item to tonight's board meeting. Before we begin, I would like to respectfully ask that all of the board members strictly adhere to our board agreements and Robert's Rules of Order. Everyone will have an opportunity to speak and say what they choose to on this topic. This might not be an easy topic to discuss, so I want to make sure that everyone knows that boundaries need to be in place. I will expect that each board member will be given the courtesy of being heard and will not be interrupted when they are speaking. One of the things I decided to kind of take a look back at Robert's rules. One of the things that they talk about are the basic rules of parliamentary procedure. The rights of the organization supersede the rights of an individual members. The organization has the right to make its own rules, which must be then observed by all members. Should a conflict arise between the rights of a member and the rights of the organization to do its business, the rights of the organization will prevail. And just one other comment. The presiding officer should assign the floor by recognizing a member who wishes to speak by calling them by name. No other member may interrupt or call out remarks without being called out of order. The presiding officer should remind such a member that the floor has been assigned and request his remarks to be held until the floor has been assigned to him. So, Gary, would you
Sure,
like to?
I'll go first. I just have a statement I'd like to make, and I think as board members, we all know we are volunteers here to help our schools become even better. In the beginning, we take an oath of office, part of which reads that we pledge to be prepared and honor differing opinions. We pledge to take no private action that might compromise the board, and we pledge to strive to keep our board focused on its primary mission, primary work. We all have our individual rights to vote any way we want and to participate to any amount we want. However, nowhere does it say we should be subjected to loud, offensive, and physically intimidating behavior like what occurred during our last meeting by Mr. Charleston. That behavior is not tolerated in our classroom and certainly should not be displayed at the board table. It creates an environment that is detrimental to our primary goal, and the collateral damage from this incident is significant. After Mr. Charleston left the meeting room, people in the room at that meeting told me they were concerned leaving the building. They didn't know what to expect. There is now a police officer in the room because board members, staff, and members of the community need to feel safe when they're in the meetings. This issue has been building for a while. We have tried to work through it, but a few weeks ago, I received what I think are negative, hostile emails from Dan detailing a personal issue, not a school board issue. Concerned about their content, I shared them with the board, and then came the physical outburst of 2 weeks ago. So based on the emails and other actions and the fact that there has been no apology for these actions, I can only assume Mr. Charleston is not embarrassed by these actions and he finds them appropriate. If a student in any of our buildings demonstrated this type of behavior, there would be consequences. At the board level, all we can do is call out this bullying behavior and ask for it to stop. We need to conduct the business of the district in a professional, non-threatening manner, and we need to live up and respect to our oath of office. Thank you.
Are there any other comments?
I'll go. I'm very disturbed by the pattern of hostile, threatening actions I have seen escalate over the past 2 months. These bullying behaviors have migrated from behind closed session doors, through official district email communications, and at the last meeting, these abusive behaviors erupted in our board's public workspace. Bullying at any level should not go unreported or unchallenged. That must be a district-wide philosophy. Bullying by a sitting board member will continue until the full board sends the message that it will not be tolerated. The board, and I mean the whole board, polices itself. But at the same time, each board member is ultimately responsible for his or her individual conduct. No matter what disagreements we may have, no matter how unhappy we may be with past elections, no matter how we may feel personally offended by the comments of another board member, there are no excuses for violent behavior and threats tossed around in such brazen manner. It is a board member's oath to act in a manner respectful of the office. As an employer, District 201 is obligated to address signs of workplace violence if identified. This board table is a district workplace. Official business is conducted here, and district employees are required to be present, and community members are often in attendance. This workplace must be free of abusive outbursts. District email is also a district workplace. Members use it to conduct official business with our superintendent, staff, and community. Our virtual workplace must not be used to intimidate or threaten others. In the course of district operations, Superintendent Carey or other administrative staff are required to occasionally access board member email accounts for legal purposes. How would Kevin or other staff interpret Mr. Charleston's threatening emails had they discovered them during a routine records search? How do these hostile, vindictive narratives impact the work environment and employee relations with our superintendent? Additionally, I'm alarmed by the threats directed at the district and the personal revengeful threats directed at Mrs. Charlton. Threats containing clear payback language with the apparent intent of creating unease and fear. If these behaviors came from any 201 employee, the district would be obligated to seriously investigate for possible disciplinary action. Unfortunately, there is no such disciplinary recourse for elected members of a public body. Personal vendettas and personal agendas get in the way of official board business. Emotional decisions are supposed to yield marginal outcomes. If that is true, then vendetta-driven decisions, the highest form of emotional decision-making, can only contribute to negative outcomes for our district. After all that has transpired, I have a much clearer historical perspective of previous board table discussions and controversies. I also have new insight into how I view our board's future conversations. I'm sorry I had to say anything in public, but given the behavioral escalations and limited recourse, it was difficult to continue ignoring it. I expect Mr. Charleston's hostile behaviors to cease. I expect our board to agree there is no place for these behaviors anywhere in our district.
Okay, anything else? Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to say something, please. I campaigned for a seat on this board for one reason, and that was to keep this district moving in a positive direction to benefit all of the students throughout the entire district. I didn't have a personal agenda, nor did I have a personal vendetta. I don't sit on this board to be threatened, to feel fearful in leaving a meeting, to feel anxious pulling into my driveway, to wade through emails riddled with threats to specific board members, the district as a whole, and acknowledging the collateral damage that will certainly be done. Regardless of any perceived wrong, what happened at the last meeting was beyond rational and beyond acceptable, and that's nothing that I signed up for. We have far too much to do as it relates to this district to waste another minute entertaining these behaviors.
Okay, I have a couple of things as well, but I want to give some background first. After the last board meeting and after I received Mr. Armstrong's request, I did get in touch with our attorney. So any of the comments that I have here are certainly with council's knowledge. All 7 board members have been elected to office by our community to serve and protect our district interests, and we have promised to abide by all the laws and rules governing such. This Board of Education has had many hours of closed session board self-evaluations with the Illinois Association of School Boards. We have prepared 3 separate board agreements, mostly dealing with board member conduct, which is what we're talking about here tonight. One part being that board members will treat each other and staff with respect. Board Policy 280 states, "I shall encourage and respect the free expression of opinion by my fellow board members." And we have all taken an oath of office which states, "I will take no private action that might compromise the board or administration." However, there is one board member who has chosen to no longer abide by many of these rules and the rules of common decency and respectful adult behavior. In early August, Mr. Charleston began writing a series of emails to 2 board members, one of which was myself. In these emails, copies of which were forwarded to the entire board, our superintendent, and our attorney, he revealed many things. He admitted that he had joined the board only to avenge wrongs that he had suffered and that those who had wronged him were now gone. He admitted threatening past board members with actions that would cause them harm and threatened to do the same now if his demands weren't met. He said he was angry, really, really angry, and that we were now the enemy. He said he intended to take more steps and would start a war, and that would do whatever he had to turn 201 upside down, and that revenge is best served cold. But it was truly terrifying when over a month later, the anger was still high that he felt the need to start screaming at fellow board members and fly off the handle and cause a scene in front of dozens of parents and teachers. Yet this is exactly what happened at the board meeting in early September. Mr. Charlton berated Ms. Caparelli for asking a question and then violently screamed at Mr. Armstrong while demonstrating physically threatening behavior. The chair demanded Mr. Charleston stop this behavior or the police would be called. After this meeting, I was approached by 2 fellow board members and numerous people who were in the room, all of whom have expressed grave concern for their safety and the safety of those attending school board meetings. Personal threats and violence will never have a place in this boardroom. The chair fully understands that Mr. Charleston will be seeking revenge on the district and that he has a vendetta against particular board members, one of which is myself, and the district as a whole. As a chair, it is my responsibility to keep order, and I intend to do so. If it takes a lawyer to make that happen, so be it. If it takes a police officer to make that happen, so be it. None of us should ever again receive written threats to do us harm. None of us should ever be dared to settle arguments outside. And none of us should ever again feel physically threatened in this or any other building, or when we walk out to our car after a meeting. The threatening emails must end. The screaming and yelling must end. And the threats of violence must end. We as members of the school board are supposed to set an example for our community. We demand that administrators and teachers deal with bullies in our school. And as the chair of this board, I intend to keep bullying behavior out of our boardroom. Are there any other comments?
If I may. Thank you. Board member conduct. I find it unfortunate that we're taking the time that otherwise could be spent on substantive matters related to the district's governance. Discussions about our finances, our student achievements, learning environments, but the subject's been called, so here are my brief observations. Board member conduct. It's my belief and opinion that our board member conduct should be governed by the law and by agreements passed by this board in open session. Included in those agreements are not to interrupt each other, not to judge each other's opinions, not to confront each other publicly, but rather to address concerns between our members privately. Board member conduct. It's my belief that when board members offer themselves as sounding boards or mediation points for disputes and misunderstandings, that they should not then renege on that offer. It is my belief that board members owe each other the integrity of their spoken commitments. Board member conduct. It is my belief that no board member should at any time ever repeat to members of the board or the community or the district staff secondhand accusations or allegations, and then claim the veil of protection of the notion that those allegations and accusations, if spoken in a closed meeting, cannot be revisited or openly vetted, particularly when they're both malicious and untrue. I'm especially resolute in asserting my belief on this matter when it involves speaking of other board members' family. To pass along as fact, either fabricated or at best, second or third hand, he said, she said, is simply wrong in my view, and should never happen amongst this board or its members. Board member conduct. As noted, it is my belief that we must comport our district business discussions to the construct and limitations of the law, particularly the Open Meetings Act. It was no accident that there was a presentation on that matter at the last board meeting. And it wasn't academic. The Act itself governs private as well as public conversations, including email, social media, and other private communications about board business and the scope of the conversations that are allowed and appropriate in closed session. And the Act is very specific and clear. It must be strictly construed with respect to those limits. And it bears stating that violations of the Act, technical or otherwise, known and unknown, are violations of the state law we were sworn to uphold. Board member conduct. It is my belief that when faced with matters that create discomfort with board actions and behaviors, that it is the board member's obligation and right to act and speak in accordance with their conscience, and to include district administration in those issues in an effort to resolve them, no matter how uncomfortable that may be. I have, to the best of my ability, made every effort to abide by these beliefs, our agreements, and the established protocols for our meetings. Over the course of the last 2 months, I have made particular efforts to do so in light of what I believe were violations of those agreements, aspects of the Open Meetings Act, as well as protocols and behaviors that I believe are appropriate for board members. In light of those beliefs and concerns, I have engaged in decisions of conscience. My intent was never to turn those decisions into public displays or confrontations. However, at our last meeting, I was, at the end of open session, openly confronted by another board member on one of those decisions. I did not expect that confrontation in open session or to have that happen after a vote had been taken. I believed it was highly inappropriate, and I was completely taken back by it and offended. And unfortunately, I reacted badly to that. I should not have continued to engage the confrontation, and I openly acknowledge that my reaction to it was inappropriately, certainly in tone and tenor, and I genuinely regret that. But what is additionally clear to me is that I have become a target of a concerted effort, both privately and publicly, for acting in accordance with my conscience. For what it's worth, I see that reality as unfortunate, but I view all of it as this sort of made-for-TV theater that we do and seem to so willingly embrace. Witness this discussion. All I can do in response is what I have done and offer anyone interested the opportunity to speak with me directly. I have had the opportunity to speak with several community members and welcome any other questions and contacts. Additionally, I have offered previously and will continue to offer to my fellow board members the opportunity to speak with me directly and privately as contemplated in our board agreements. In any event, I will not be bullied, publicly or privately, into doing or not doing anything my conscience and convictions dictate. If that makes me unpopular in certain quarters, then I must choose principle over popularity. With that said, I would much rather focus on the actual work of this district going forward, rather than spending any more time talking about how we work or don't work with each other. Thank you.
Comments?
I would just like to say that I have not felt threatened or intimidated personally as a board member, and that I hope that this discussion can result in some resolution on behalf of people that apparently do, because I think that this is not the best way to spend our time.
Anything else? Okay, the next item is guidelines for class size.
What the board has is guidelines for class size, and what I'll preface before I open up to board discussion. Number one, from my perspective, this is kind of a starting point in terms of when we look at class size. I think there are other, anytime we look at staffing decisions, I think there are other elements that need to be part of that conversation in terms of students and demographics and those types of things, because in some cases, you know, I've seen situations where students thrive in a larger environment than even in a smaller environment. We still have students that can struggle. And I say this not for the benefit of our audience, I would say this anyways, but when you look at the research on class sizes, the one consistent element that you see is it comes down to the teacher in front of the students. I mean, that's what it boils down to. So we're always faced, you know, when we reach March in terms of looking at enrollments and class sizes and so forth, you know, how do we allot staff within the district? And so, you know, this is a framework in terms of, you know, trying to keep kindergarten and first grade classes between 20 and 23, and then 2 through 5 between 25 and 28. And so that kind of gives us an idea of when that question comes up, do we need to add another section? You know, we can kind of go by that. The one, a lot of times we don't talk about the junior high or the high school in terms of these conversations. And again, looking at what's been done in the past in other districts and some of the research, a lot of times that class size is defined in your core areas, your science, your math, language arts, and social studies. And again, it's around that 25 per class. And so you can take the enrollment of your buildings, divide that by 25, and that kind of gives you, for the core areas, a projected FTE. And so what we would do then is when we got to March, we looked at enrollments, this would be, again, one piece of information we'd look at in terms of staffing. We'd also look at the needs of our students. And then the other piece as well, because our goal is always to try to arrive at a balanced budget, sometimes, unfortunately, those decisions are also driven by the financial constraints that we live within, or in some cases, facilities. I mean, you need a classroom to put students in if you're going to, you know, open up another section. And then in terms of, you know, based on current enrollment, you know, there are some opportunities where, you know, if we were in March and we were staffing, there are some opportunities where we might say, you know, we need to add a section. There are possibly some opportunities where we might say, you know, we may be able to reduce a section. And then also in terms of the high school and junior high, we might want to look a little bit differently at the FTE for the core areas. The other areas within the high school and junior high, the elective areas or areas beyond the core areas, those would be driven by student selection, similar to what we do now. And at this juncture, there hasn't been a discussion about, you know, minimum class size to run a section, you know, in part because when you have a smaller high school like we do or a smaller junior high, sometimes, you know, it's difficult to get up to, you know, 20, 25 students in a section, and you still want to try to provide that opportunity. But I think it does start that conversation of how to staff the high school and junior high, and how to utilize our FTE. And then the other possibility is we're going through the EPIR process. You know, I know one of the things that we talk about is providing additional support and help for our students. And, you know, if we take a look at these staffing guidelines, there might be opportunities maybe you shrink a section at a grade level, but now you can utilize that personnel to provide that RTI support in some other areas to support students as well. So I don't necessarily look at this as, you know, these are definitively areas we can reduce staff or increase staff, but rather it's an opportunity again to look at how we utilize our staff within our building and hopefully utilize it to the optimal level to have a positive impact on our students.
Can I ask a question? In here, you talk about that enrollments will be reviewed in March. So if I can understand this, what you're talking about here, and we've talked about this before, is setting just guidelines, and then each year we look at what our potential enrollment is for the following year. And then you also talk about reviewing by August 1st to determine that. So this would then be, we would have guidelines in place, and then this is that you're calling the administrators, the principals, as to how this plays out. Okay, I just have one other question, and thank you for that. I know I called you today and we talked about this, but I just wanted to ask this also here. I have a question about the 25 students at the junior high, and we did talk about that sometimes some of the classes at the junior high are very, very small, and yet there's others that are very crowded. So did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Right, and in conversations with John Jonak and Amy Patrona, you know, part of that's driven by the schedule and again, student electives and student choice. And so even though if you were to take the enrollment divide by 25, you're pretty close to the FTE for the core areas. Part of it is just the constraints of the schedule itself. And I know that's one of the things that the junior high administration is looking at, is that schedule. So if there's a way to create a schedule that will allow for better use of FTE and better balancing of classroom or class size, they're going to bring that forward to us. So I'm hoping that through looking at the schedule itself and then also looking at the FTE allotment, that we'll be able to balance those class sizes.
And then just the last thing is, you state here that that these recommended class size are based upon the National Council of Teachers of English. So I mean, they look fair to me in terms of what you're bringing to us. So that's all I had.
So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you came to these targets. I mean, more specifically, just if the upper end of the range is a number that we had previously discussed was really not acceptable. So I'm just, I mentioned, I think to you yesterday, that I'm kind of curious, just maybe a little bit more detail about,
Sure.
why that number versus a different number. How did you arrive at the number you arrived at?
Right.
Was there?
And that's in conversations with other districts, in terms of when they look at a particular grade level, when do you add a section? And usually it falls right around 10% of what the target is. So if your target is 25, then 10% of that is 2.5, so 3. And so that's it seems like that is the most common is you look at the grade level, and then by a factor of 10%, that's when you're approaching that point that you would start that to consider whether or not to divide that into another section.
I guess my question is why 25? Why not 23 or 21? Or, just trying to understand when, based on everything I've been reading and all the research I've done, there's a lot of advocacy for, smaller class size. So just, I get the money piece, I understand that, but that isn't what you presented us. What you presented us was a target. It didn't include dollars. So without the dollar conversation, what's the theory? What's the educational theory behind that number versus a different number?
And, the educational theory is based upon, if you look at the research, class size really doesn't become a factor until you get down to 12 to 15 students. Then there can be a significant impact. And so, absent of that, then you look at the number of students in the class, and realistically, how much individual attention can be afforded to, and not all students need individual attention, but those who do. And so when you start to look at studies in that light, for the lower elementary, it's typically around 20 students, and then as the students get older, it's typically 25 is what you'll find. That's pretty consistent. But again, it's and then part of it, like as you're suggesting, there is, even though cost isn't specified, I think there's also an implied, if you start to say that you're targeting all of our classrooms to be 20, obviously that's going to mean an increased number of sections that would possibly make it difficult for us to staff to that level.
I guess I'm trying to balance this against the discussion from, several months ago where 27 or 28 was too many, and now that's the higher end of the target. I'm just trying to rectify that in my mind, and I'm struggling a little bit with that. Also, a lot of the studies now and the research does point to different demographics of classrooms, the class size having a different impact. So most of what I've read called out, low income and English language learners. I'm sure there are other things, IEP and other things that also can play a role, but just from a basic media perspective, what's available out there in the media, there is a fair amount of data that indicates that plays a role as well. So I don't mean to be putting you on the spot. I'm having a hard time kind of resolving that in my head, this discussion versus, 4 or 5 months ago, and how those things come together.
Sure. And that's why I kind of qualify. To me, this is, starts the discussion. I don't think it is the end of the discussion. There are some districts I know that when they are considering enrollments, they do have a multiplier based upon student demographics. So, for instance, a student with an IEP might have you look at the makeup of the classroom and you add these multipliers, and so based upon the demographics, it may actually be recommended, well, actually that class size should be here because of some of these other factors. And there are some districts that do work through those calculations in terms of, how each of those different, demographics can impact the learning environment. So, that's something that can be considered, as we're looking at class sizes. I think, again, I think that has to be part of the conversation when you're looking at buildings and staffing of buildings. I think that has to be part of the conversation.
Kevin,
Sorry, Joel.
I was just going to say, the other element that's not, addressed at all here is how we staff paraprofessionals in the classroom. Some of them obviously are based on IEPs. Some of them may be classroom, for the whole classroom. So that also, plays a role, I think, when you look at the overall staffing. I know we did, when we had the larger end, the 28, the 29s, we did go the route of having paraprofessionals to share between some of those classrooms to provide for additional instruction. So that's, I think we're missing that piece in this conversation, and it is an integral part, I think.
My question was more on, kind of in tandem with what Shannon was talking about. When we get to that discussion, and if it comes to that point where we have classroom sizes that are impacted by low income and English language learners, second language learners, I'm looking for a descriptive for us as well as our population of parents to understand why those numbers are how that's impacted, or how those numbers affect the number, the total classroom number? Is there a way to illustrate that better when we get to that point for us?
Yeah, I'd have to think about that.
I don't know
how-
if
how the
there's
best
like
way
a
to-
standard,
Right, the best way to model that, yeah.
okay.
You know, Kevin, I think as Joel pointed out, there are certain scenarios where students get extra assistance assigned to them specifically based on needs. And I think that one of the concerns that I've always had in public education is that the low-income and English language learners don't necessarily have that, whereas children who have other identified issues may get some of that support. So I think that we have the benefit of having some additional adults in classrooms to help mitigate some of the impact to the teacher and to the instruction. But, you know, when we talk about guidelines, I just want to make sure that we're thinking broadly and that we're robust in our approach to try and give all of the adults in our buildings, you know, every opportunity to serve every student and to try and meet as many needs as possible. And, you know, obviously increasing class sizes anywhere it is going to, you know, potentially have a negative impact. I don't think it's a guarantee, but I just think there's a risk there that we have an obligation to mitigate. And I will say in all fairness to you and the budget, to Kim, that, you know, these are times where all over the country class sizes are increasing. And, you know, I recognize that, but I think I still feel obligated as a board member to you know, fight until we absolutely have to say that, you know, the smaller class sizes are important and they're valuable. And I think parents and potentially teachers, I won't speak for teachers, but I think parents would certainly agree and have voiced those concerns. And, you know, we just want to, I want to keep fighting on behalf of that idea as long as possible and, you know, continue to deal with the reality of our budget situation as necessary.
Well, I guess, are you done? I guess I would agree with Shannon that piggybacking on something you said and then something you said before, it would be wonderful, I think, if we could have 20 in a class across the district. But I think a couple of things that prohibit that are money and space. So that, I mean, I totally agree with you. The teacher-to-student ratio is extremely important. And so, you know, I definitely trust that that will be looked at when the administration is making that. But I think one of the things that we had talked about last spring was that that there does need to be, you know, that equity and all of our students. And I think we have, you know, fantastic paraprofessionals in our district that do work with our students in that. But we have a situation like, and again, I appreciate you putting the junior high in there because we've had some huge bubble classes that have moved to our elementary schools and gone to the junior high, and then those class sizes are very big. So it would be good to see you know, some guidelines. And also, I can guess or assume, you correct me if I'm wrong, that basically what the plan would be then, as you look at this in March and then August, is to just allocate the resources that we currently have in our district. So we look at who we have. We're not, you know, I mean, I would guess to look and see what we have. So, okay.
Kevin, in relation to your comment about the junior high, is recommendations or plans something that we can expect to see sometime soon? Or is it really just a discussion that's kind of going on with you and the team there?
You know, I know they're having the conversation, and because of the way, you know, the budgeting and staffing timeline works, I mentioned to John that, you know, the board would have to see something January, you know, February at the latest in order to take a look at it and consider it, because March, typically, that's when you make those staffing decisions, so.
So it is possible then, in the middle of winter, we'll be seeing some
Right.
suggestions. Or I mean, you've suggested over the past many months that there may be, you know, an opportunity to make some type of scheduling adjustment that may assist everybody at the junior high to be more effective. And I think that, it's not maybe look at it, it's, really look at it and really come and tell us, here are 3 or 4 things we could potentially do differently that are scheduling and oriented around that type of thing versus we need more people, we need more of this, we need more, if there are changes we can make in the existing configurations that don't cost us. I think sooner versus later, we want to know what those things are and we want to start getting the ball rolling in that direction.
And one of the other things too that John's looking at with the junior high, right now the high school and junior high have different start and end times, which sometimes is a hindrance when you start talking about collaboration and those types of things. So they're also looking at, and this ends up being a bigger discussion with transportation, those elements, but seeing if it's possible to align their daily schedule better so that it does make that easier.
Thank you.
Just wanted to make sure I understood, how the impact of the guidelines thing would actually play out. So, because the impact that you outlined, particularly at the, and it really piggybacks on Shannon's observation, particularly at the elementary level, it looks like the guidelines, if they're just numbers, and I personally just recoil at the notion of just thinking about these environments as just numbers. I remind myself to think of them as names like Jordan and Caitlin and Josh and what happens in their day. But as the guidelines are spelled out, it looks like what we would end up with based on just the number recommendations are that we would increase class sizes effectively in 5 sections in the elementary level, including the 2 that we added staff to and added a section to at Manning this past spring. So, understanding budget and economic concerns, but somewhat less sensitive to that than I was perhaps 2 years ago. Again, I'll get in line with Shannon and suggest that it's not my sense that increasing class sizes helps any child. And so to the extent that we are considering any decision that will negatively impact an educational experience for a child named Josh or Caitlin or Jordan, I'd like to think long and hard about that.
And, well, and, number one, this is, I chose guideline, very deliberately.
I know.
It's not board policy. It's, it's merely that. It's a guideline, it's a framework. Quite honestly, it could be tweaked and changed many, many times, So it is a guideline. And I think, you do have to look at, students, and I agree with you, Dan, that, I'm right there with you that there are the students have names and they have needs. But at the same time, it might, and not that you even need the guidelines to do this, but it might afford us to look at staff a little bit differently and possibly, add some additional support that isn't necessarily the classroom teacher, but, so in essence, you can have still 2 adults working with students, at a grade level, if that makes sense, so that we're still meeting the needs of our students.
I think the fact that, I'm sorry, Marie.
No, go ahead.
The fact that we haven't had guidelines certainly has contributed to a lot of these issues. So the fact that we're now at a point where we're willing to adopt some guidelines, whether they're broad or narrow, they're guidelines. And I think it's critical because we have been talking about establishing guidelines for a very long time. So thank you for this.
I just had a quick question. Both of our elementary schools are Title I now? Is it right? Or are they both low?
Just
Just free and reduced lunch?
Yeah, just Miller. Actually, the high school and the junior high will be receiving some Title I services this year.
Okay, thank you.
I have one comment, and it kind of goes to Shannon, what you were saying about the ESL students, the low-income students, the special needs students, and that is, what is out of the equation here is enhancing the early childhood program so that students arrive to our elementary schools better prepared for a more rigorous curriculum. And maybe we are going to be able to address some of these needs at an earlier age so that they're not so plentiful. And so I hope in the long run that helps bring about the same end that you're referring to.
Anybody else?
Well, and that's the needs of the students have come up a few times, and that's something that I can look at and see how, what types of multipliers, what types of factors we can look at as well, and bring that to the table as well.
Thank you.
I would just piggyback on something Mary Kay said, that I do think that it's been talked about for a long time, and I'm happy to have it brought to us. If every class could have, these are children, there are children in these rooms, and if we could afford it, I would do it. I would do it tomorrow. So I appreciate that all the comments, and thank you for this. Okay, any other comments?
Are there next steps, or what is this, right? This just kind of appeared, so what are we doing here with this?
Again, these are just guidelines. My plan is to continue to have conversations within the district regarding them, and then also to look at some of those other factors and see how that might be able to be applied as well. And then I can, before we get to that March, when we're actually going through the staffing, come back to the board with an update on any tweaks, any modifications, any changes.
And then could we also do that by August 1st too? Summer meeting, just so we can see where.
Sure.
Because that would be after registration, right, August 1st. Okay.
I'm sorry, I do have one more question. So staff and adults throughout the buildings have seen or are aware of this, or is this fairly limited, your discussion on this?
The discussion has been pretty limited. The administrative team has seen it. I know Laura has seen it, but I don't think it's been very widely distributed. So
Okay. Just wanted to understand
Sure,
kind of
sure.
what the population is up to this point.
Right.
So.
And that's why I'm saying, we've got the guidelines for tonight, but then we'll continue the conversation and then possibly come back with an amended version or a tweaked version. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is an action item then, and the chair will entertain a motion to approve the guidelines for class size as presented.
So moved?
Second?
No, wait.
Well,
You're shaking your head no, Shannon?
Well, I guess I'm confused about you're going to come back with more clarification, different things, but we're taking action. I'm sorry.
yeah, and just to, piggyback, because to be upfront, for me to sign off on a target class size as high as 28 in an elementary level building, I think we recoiled at that, this past spring. So I'd be reticent to jump on board real fast with that at this point. So, I would request that we defer any action on this until you can do some additional work and lay out some additional sort of conversations about how that actually plays out specifically, as opposed to generically.
Well, if I could interrupt, I think the one thing interject. If we could, one of the things I think we talked about quite a bit before was that this is not policy. We're not making a policy decision. We're coming up with guidelines to give the administration and the principals and staff something to work with. And so we could certainly look at the needs each year in March and August, but I think one of the things we talked about and that we also told our community that we were going to do was we were going to come up with guidelines that we have not had. So I think it's on the agenda as an action item, so I guess we've heard the conversation here about what's going to happen as we go forward, but setting the guidelines. So the question is, are we prepared to do that?
I mean, there is, I didn't mean to cut you off,
No,
I'm
no.
sorry.
I'm asking the question.
There is an impact of the guidelines with this document, so we see how it would have played out this year. And I think we have to deal with hypotheticals until the numbers come in. We have to have a set of parameters, and, you know, given where this information came from, I think the guidelines are fair. I think they are only guidelines. I think the guidelines are fair. And I think and I don't want to speak for you, I think what you said was that in March, you'll look at the numbers and you're going to see how these things play out. Whether or not the multipliers are attached, or you're going to look at this additionally. Is that correct? And then again in August. But these are just parameters for where we want our class sizes to be. We didn't have guidelines last year. We didn't have anything last year. For the last 2 years, you know, we've been having this conversation about class sizes. And yeah, you know, 28, 29, 30 kids in a classroom, it's a lot of kids in a classroom. I'm willing to accept these guidelines because they're guidelines.
I would just add the same thing. I think we have, you know, the option to certainly review it later and say, you know, for the reasons that administration may bring to us, or, you know, some other concerns that board members or the board may have, we have the option to alter that at that time, because these are guidelines. So I don't see any reason to postpone adopting guidelines. They're not hard and fast.
I guess I'll ask one question to Kevin. So I'm looking over this, you know, Manning and Miller enrollment here for this current school year. Did we take into consideration the equation about the special needs students and the ESL students, or is this just, we looked at the numbers, we looked at the students, and we did the basic division? Because this might break up entirely differently if we had applied what the actual uniqueness of the students in the classrooms are.
Right. As I said, this is just starts the conversation, because this is just taking in consideration number of students in a particular grade level.
Right.
That's all it takes in consideration.
It's not considering any of those other
Right.
categories we were talking about. Okay.
And that's why, and maybe whether or not this helps the board or not, but again, you know, I can make the commitment to, you know, look at this again, you know, get input from staff, look at some of those other factors, and then, you know, if it needs to be adjusted, that adjustment can be brought back to the board.
I guess I just feel like we're not in a rush with this, because we won't be utilizing these factors until a little bit later in our year. So I don't personally have a problem saying, you know, we can give it a couple more months and do a little more robust work and get the guidelines fleshed out a little more clearly. I mean, if it was January and, you know, it's like, oh gosh, we haven't done this and now we're up against the wall. But I just don't feel like we're up against the wall in this particular item. And as much as I'd like to very much see some clear direction in place, just my personal, you know, view of this is I think that it's lacking a little bit of, you know, some additional input and some of those details that I would personally prefer to see. And I hate to put things sort of in writing or in place, you know, knowing that some things that I value aren't quite outlined as much as I would prefer to see. So.
Well, I would have to say that what we have in front of us is guidelines that we have been talking about for years, I should say. And these are guidelines that are based upon the National Council of Teachers. And I can't imagine that those numbers haven't been thought about, that our district is too much different than most districts elsewhere, and that we have students with IEPs, students with needs. And so, I think we have told our community that we are going to talk about this. We've talked about it, and I think it's, from my perspective, I think, again, we're not talking about policy here. We're talking about a guideline so that we as a board can set those guidelines for our administrators to go and do the work that they need to do and come up with plans for next year for our students and the year after, and each year look at those numbers. So I think we've heard a couple of times here that none of this is in stone, it's not etched in stone, but it is based on something that just didn't appear, and we are hearing that we will hear again about any specific parameters. So, I'm comfortable that we've had this discussion quite a number of times, and I'm ready to give some guidance to our administration and our superintendent.
To the extent then that the question will be called, I mean, speaking for me, 28's not a good number for me. I don't like that number. Just make it really tangible. And so, speaking for me personally, if we're to utilize just sort of broad guidelines, I would much prefer to see a recommended maximum class size of 25, because we recoiled in horror at the notion of 28.
And Kevin, it is good to know that other districts do have multipliers and do consider some of those things. I'm glad that you shared that, because I don't think I wouldn't have known that otherwise, but it's good to know that.
All right, I will call the question and we will go from there. Then the chair will entertain a motion to approve the guidelines for class size as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
2 no?
Yeah.
Okay. You got that, Mary Kay? Okay, then the motion carries. Okay, the next item on the agenda, superintendent's report.
With superintendent's report first, September 18th, we had the first, what I term our joint committee meeting in terms of bringing our 4 committees together on the 18th. And I think the process went pretty well. I think the community appreciated it. We had nice representation from the staff. The finance committee, their conversation revolved primarily around the transparency when it comes to the financial status of the district, and then also, and then in terms of the district dashboard and then the EPERT process. Facility committee reviewed the short-range projects that were completed over the summer, and then the committee is going to continue to review the district facility plan. Steve Cashman has been invited to the next meeting to kind of talk a little bit about the current status of buildings and what some of the proposed changes in year 2, year 3. Then obviously part of that conversation has to be the timeline and then also the funding of those projects. The climate committee continued their work on the Bullying Awareness Week, November 12th through the 16th. But they also broke off a second group to start looking at some character education programs that are out there, start to evaluate those and seeing if any of them would be beneficial to our district. And then the strategic planning group, they were looking at the strategic plan in terms of how to measure what we have in place and the progress and how to implement that plan. And so they're working on developing that criteria, those metrics, so that we can mark that progress. And the next meeting for the committees will be on October 16th at the high school. We are changing the time a little bit. It was 7 o'clock. Some people asked if we could move it up to 6:30, and so we are moving that up to 6:30. The other item I have is I'll be hosting a superintendent coffee on October 25th at 7:00 p.m. at the high school. And typically, I have a very brief agenda. I update whoever attends, and it's open up to all community members and staff members. Whoever attends, I update them a little bit on the district, and then any questions that they may have, I tried my best to answer those questions. And so that'll be October 25th. And then the last thing that I have, the student recognition schedule that we had talked about, that is available, and so that will be circulated this evening so that you can jot down the dates that you'd be able to attend some of the various recognition opportunities we have.
Okay. Are there any board reports? Are you done, Kevin?
Yes.
Are there any board reports? I have one that I want to share. I was happy to see this today, that the DuPage Middle School Science Teachers Roundtable will be hosted at Westmont Junior High School on Thursday, November 15th, 2012, from 12 to 3. And our host teachers, Laura Riley, Jen Goodall, and Brian Sherry. And the meeting will be to increase student achievement in science by generating conversation, sharing strategies and artifacts, and discussing curriculum. So, happy to talk about that. Thank you to our science teachers for doing that.
Marie, just a quick comment. I think everybody has the ISB. Yes. If you can take a quick look through, because at the Tri-I conference, the delegate has to sort of say whether we as a board agree or don't agree. And, you know, it would be good if you find anything in here where you don't agree with the recommendation. So the ISB has their recommendations listed after each item. If there's anything in here you don't agree with what they're planning to do, if you could let me know.
Okay.
So that, you know, that may be something we're going to have to discuss at a board meeting before the conference comes up. So it's going to take a little bit, so I'll encourage you to start reading now. Make sure, because we will have, if there's anything, we will have to try and get it on an agenda before the conference.
Would you let me know if you hear from people, and then we'll put it on?
Yeah, I guess if you want to just let me know directly, send me an email about which number,
Right.
and then when I sort of, I guess I'll figure out a deadline, and somebody will email all of us, but, you know, sometime before that last meeting, we're going to need to have a deadline, and I haven't really looked at the calendar, so I'll do that, and then
We have a board meeting on November 13th, which
Yeah.
is right before the tri-conference.
so, but like at least
Yep.
a week or two before that, everyone has to be through this and have the,
Right,
you know.
okay.
So we'll figure out what that exact date
Okay.
is, and we'll get it out on email.
Great.
Okay.
I will also remind everyone that next Thursday, October 4th, is the homecoming parade, and October 5th is the homecoming game. So everybody come out and cheer on our team, who won over the weekend, so that was great.
Mary, one last thing, Miller Ice Cream Social. Shannon, I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about it, but I know Gary and I were both there, and you were there, and it was a very fun-filled event. We volunteered to work, and everyone seemed to be having a good time, so.
Yes, in spite of the weather, it was chilly and rainy, and we still had an inflatable obstacle course and a dunk tank. And we should probably publicly acknowledge the two teachers, the parent and the principal, who graciously got in the dunk tank in the rain in the 50 to close to 60-degree weather. So Ms. Havel and Mrs. Chapinski and Principal Boss and Mr. Hancock, who got wet and cold and hopefully didn't end up with any flu or pneumonia as a result, but the kids were absolutely over the moon getting to attempt to dunk some of those adults. So it really made for a fun activity.
Okay, anything else? Okay, are there any public comments? All right, then the next school board meeting is October 9th, 2012, 7 o'clock here at the Village Hall. And get to this. The chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining and personnel issues and to review closed session minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Abstain?
Ms. Caparelli, yes. Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Okay, and there will be a vote after closed session. Thank you. Resume our meeting. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the release of the closed session minutes dated January 25th, 2011, February 8th, 2011, March 1st, 2011, March 17th, 2011, parts 1 and 2, April 26th, 2011, September 6th, 2011, and November 8th, 2011.
So moved?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Okay, motion carries. Then the chair will entertain a motion for the destruction of verbatim closed session minutes from September 16th, 2008 to September 28th, 2010.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Then the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.